So everyone, welcome. This is the Emerald stage, and this, of course, is the logistics and fulfillment track, sponsored by First Mile. Our first speaker today will be Rob Hahn, Chief Operating Officer at Pattern. Rob also has executive experience at Whitebox and at Amazon, and is one of the world's foremost experts when it comes to e-commerce logistics. So let's give a warm welcome to Rob.
Good morning. It worked the first time. Nice job. Yeah, you never know. Microphones. Good morning and welcome. So as Jordan said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Pattern. I've joined Pattern in August of last year. Before that, I was at Whitebox and e-commerce, 3PL, and kind of a tech-enabled services around all things e-commerce, pretty agnostic to both the marketplace and also carriers. And then before that, I spent 8 years at Amazon. I started as an intern there and left as an executive. Really cool opportunity, and at a really cool time, joined in 2010 at Amazon, and just a really incredible growth that everyone in the world is aware of that happened at Amazon during that time. We were solving really cool really cool problems, a pretty fun time. But I want to talk to you today about supply chain and logistics, not just in e-commerce actually, but outside of that. Like, as everyone is aware, the pandemic happened a couple years ago. And one of the things that is interesting that came out of that was finally people focused and understood that supply chain is not just a fun side project, but it actually is something that is core and needs to be focused on within an organization. That's not a fad that doesn't go away. It continues to be something that needs to be a central focus of every single brand when you're trying to grow, not only on e-commerce, but everywhere around the world. We're going to focus in on e-commerce in a couple different ways. I'm actually going to focus on some omni-channel and what it means, like how do you actually unlock things and get competitive in marketplaces focused on omni-channel. What does that actually mean? Let's talk about that for a minute. Then we're going to focus a little bit on D2C. I think a lot of brands are really focused right now on how do we navigate D2C? Do we even do D2C? How do we do D2C e-commerce logistics in a way that makes sense if we can do it financially the right way? So launching a Shopify store, does it make sense for me to do that? Should I shut mine down? We'll spend a little time talking about what that means. But the real focus here is it's not a fad that your supply chain is the most important piece of unlocking new opportunities for growth. That's the idea, and hopefully you can step away from this without understanding today. So I went to a small school called Huntington University. It's outside Fort Wayne, Indiana. Beautiful campus. And kind of two things that I want to talk about here. There's two pictures that you see up on the screen. One is the quad area. That was put in the 90s in Huntington. And the other one was this lake. It's called Lake Snowtip. And there was a groundskeeper that joined Huntington in the late 80s. And he has an immense amount of pride about what he has built. It's a beautiful campus. One of the reasons actually that drew me in to go to this very small school. But on the left side here, he actually went through it's a man-made lake, and they put it in the early 90s. And when he went through this process, he actually chose the trees that were planted there based on the colors that they would be in the fall, as you can see. So it was beautiful. It wasn't all the same color. He actually put them in specific areas so they would actually show that in a long time from when he planted them. And the second picture you see there, in this same groundskeeper, they installed a quad, right? A new section of campus. And when they were trying to plan out where they were going to put the sidewalks, the engineers were like, hey, here's where the sidewalks should go. And actually he said, no, we shouldn't do that. What we should do is wait 2 months, wait 60 days. Because what we will do is the 18-year-olds are going to find the most efficient path, regardless of what you think, from here to where they need to go. I guarantee you. So what they did is they didn't put any sidewalks in the area, and they waited to see where the foot traffic went, and then they put sidewalks there. So regardless of how much you wanted to tell the 18-year-old where to walk at 8:30 in the morning, barely awake, with 3 hours of sleep, holding a coffee in their hand, they get to tell us. You don't get to decide. So two main things to take from that. And I always find that super interesting. I think about that in the way that I build and design software even. Within, meeting an associate where they are in a warehouse. You won't get to decide where your customers are. That's in the past. You have to find where they are so that you get to decide as much as an 18-year-old holding coffee at 8:30. You don't get to decide where your customers are. You need to meet them where they are. And The first one about the trees I want you to take away is it takes a long time. You have to plan, right? Like this isn't something that happens overnight. If you want to build something that's really, really beautiful, you got to understand that you will not see stuff right away, and you have to have the intestinal fortitude to wait and see things through. So those are two things I want to focus on. So we're going to talk about omnichannel here and what that means. So what is omnichannel? Omnichannel, by definition, would mean every channel. But actually, I would challenge that thought process. It's actually many channels. The key here is not that you should be in every single channel for a brand. That is not the right answer. I guarantee you. Like a lot of brands over the last few years have really focused on how do I get every single place. But it's actually for you, how do you play in each marketplace and each channel where you should be? How do you determine that? It's extremely hard to know, right? So the first thing I would like you to take away is omnichannel doesn't actually mean every channel. That is the wrong path. You should have a strategy around each channel, and one of those strategies should be, I don't play on that channel. That is absolutely part of your arsenal to say that is not a place that I should be or want to be. That could be Amazon that you don't play on. That could be on Walmart. It's not the right fit for your brand. It could be that you have to do those things. But absolutely an important part is understanding that you should not be on every single channel. I guarantee you. It's an impossibility. You're going to waste your time. You're going to get spread too thin. But there's kind of 3 steps in unlocking and thinking about omnichannel transactions. Number 1, you have to identify which marketplaces you should be playing on. Not just marketplaces, these are channels, right? This is, should I be in D2C? Should I do whatever that's going to be, right? Should I do my own D2C? Blah, 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 blah. Like there's 1,000 of these. You know there's 1,000 of these, right? How do I decide where I should play first? And then second, even more complex, is how do you actually know how to play on those marketplaces? Like how many people, like brands in here, how many are in 1P, like Amazon 1P? How about 3, like how many do 3P on Amazon? Or like, there's a lot of different ways just on one marketplace. And then within that, you've got a bunch of different options on how to play. So like, it's just as important to know which marketplaces. And then a secondary decision that is just as critical is how do you play on those marketplaces? And last, the whole point of this is foundationally, to answer number 2 and number 1, if you can't do the supply chain requirements in order to get onto those marketplaces, then it doesn't matter what you want nor what you think, right? Like that key to doing those things in the new world is actually based on your supply chain. What can your 3PL do? What can your own internal teams do? That actually will determine any type of sales strategy or marketplace or channel strategy that you want is 1,000% determined by your ability to actually fulfill the thing. If they can't slap the label on and understand the requirements and you don't have technology that can actually fulfill that, it doesn't matter what you want. Even if your customers are sitting there, they're going to leave them behind. So first, let's dive in on identifying marketplaces. Where should you be playing? And to do that, I want to show, this is domestic. We're going to talk about international and domestic here. If you haven't seen this before, it's kind of hilariously different between the sizes of marketplace here, right? You see Amazon being that top line, not only the biggest by a lot here for e-commerce, but also the fastest and most hockey stick type of growth that you're going to see, right? This doesn't carry through to 2022 where everyone knows, starts to level off a little bit, right? But you can see here that these marketplaces are interesting. So take a look at eBay. Pretty flat, a little bit down for the most part. Shopify continuing to grow, obviously a huge spike there during the pandemic, but also if you carry that through to 2022, I mean, look at the earnings report that came out last week, right? There's quite a bit of difference going on in what the Shopify ecosystem is doing today. They're going to continue to do well. D2C will have a space in this place forever and ever, amen. But it is not the same thing it was in 2020. It's not the slam dunk where everyone's running to that because of other supply chain disadvantages in other marketplaces. It's not the same game we're playing today. But this is an important view of where marketplaces are today and continue to grow, right? This is just the last 5 years. Who knows what the next 5 years looks like if there's going to be a different player here. But it's super important that you understand in each one of these channels, should I play on eBay? What does that look like? Is it worth the investment? Is it worth the time? But you have to have an answer for each of these channels as you think about how you engage as a brand. Now, if you look internationally, this will be something that a lot of people may not actually know. Amazon's really big, right? If you think about GMV, 600 million in GMV, but it still pales in comparison. I mean, if you take Alibaba, JD.com, like those two alone are a massive lift compared even to Amazon in the United States. There's an incredible opportunity, and really, even adoption within the marketplaces in those areas is still quite small in comparison to the population that lives in China, in these different areas where these are growing. And you have these untapped marketplaces like, take India, for example. There's so much unknown about what happens in the next decade with how India interacts with e-commerce and continues to grow. Like international, you have to have a strategy around how you want to go chase it. And Amazon is not actually the only answer internationally. It's only one piece. And if you were to break this down internationally for Amazon, it's even a smaller portion, right? That 600 billion that you see there is global Amazon, right? Of that, a huge percentage, like 85% of that's going to be here domestically in the US, right? So you have to have an absolute solution on how to do those. But you can't not play internationally if you want to continue to grow. But you got to decide which platforms you want to end up playing on. Just as important is the next step here, and that is how do you play on each of those platforms? Now, I'm going to talk about complexity around these marketplaces. Some of this might be new to some folks in the room, and some of it might not be. But there are a billion different ways in order, and I'm not going to read through all this because you have eyes, but like the point of this is actually there's a lot of different ways to interact on these marketplaces, a ton of different ways to do it. You've got your own internal team. You've got 1P. You've got 1P managed by somebody else. You've got 3P direct managed from you. Like there's an unlimited number of ways to interact with each of these marketplaces. And so, for example, there are absolute, and they continue to fracture. Like this marketplace is absolutely fractured in the last 5 years. Just take dropship, for example. So Home Depot, Target, and some of these other places that are not actually marketplaces today, they want to feel increase their SKU selection and feel more like an Amazon. So they're looking for opportunities to not hold things in their warehouses and push it through their logistics network, but they want it to feel like when you go on HomeDepot.com, you're buying from Home Depot. That's a really different type of transaction than on Amazon, where they've embraced this 3P model, right? So every one of these marketplaces, you don't think of HomeDepot.com as a marketplace today, but you're wrong. They're just doing it in this different type of process that feels very, very similar. So basically, we're having this fracturing and complexity that comes along with each one of these individual retailers operating and acting like a marketplace. And that means that all of the complexity in that situation, right? So a Target says, I don't want to touch your stuff. Brand, you have to figure it out. Think of a 50-year-old brand, a huge CPG. How the heck do they handle that? I mean, like, you might be sitting in the room here thinking, yeah, that's absolutely correct. How do I take on that complexity? Right? How do I think about who is going to actually ship the thing? That is why supply chain is absolutely critical to the growth. Because, like, spoiler alert, we're not going to go back. Home Depot's not going to be like, you know what I would love to do? Increase my cost structure again and take all your inventory in my network. That's never going to happen again. It is dead. It is in the past. Go through your mourning period. It's gone. Like, the new way to do the things partially as part of your strategy has to be drop ship for 1P if you want to play with 1P. If you don't, you want to do 3P, that's a different discussion entirely, right? But like, we need to think of retailers moving forward more similarly to marketplaces than we have in the past. It is an absolute truth. We don't get to decide anymore. Marketplaces look different 2 years from now than they did 2 years ago, and that will continue to fracture. Identifying inventory movement and supply chain requirements. Each one of these marketplaces is very, very different. And that marketplace complexity, if we just focus on marketplaces for a minute, again, I'm going to throw something up that is supposed to annoy you because it is absolutely annoying. This is just focused on Amazon. So let's just look at boxes and dimensions on Amazon. So here you go. So something on Amazon, if you aren't, this is 3P specifically, okay? So if you're doing an FBA fee calculation, something that is 18 inches by 13 inches by 7.5 inches. Does anyone know the difference in cost between something that is 18 inches by 13.5 inches by 8.5 inches? Any guesses on the difference in cost for an FBA fee? That is a 1-inch difference. Any guess? What? Double. $1? Double, not double. It's a $5 difference. Your packaging matters so much when you're playing in 3P, where it doesn't matter as much when 1P. So when you're packaging and your design team is saying, I have this incredibly new product and it is beautiful, the difference between the oversized network and the standard size network at Amazon is obscene. A 1-inch difference, a tenth of an inch difference absolutely drives potentially the difference between being profitable on a product and not. That's just the FBA fee. Now, if we take a look at the actual inbound shipping into 3P for Amazon, they're also completely different networks. So Amazon doesn't have an oversized cross-dock network. They have only for standard. So that means if you are shipping in 3P on a standard size item, the smaller of the two, you can send it into a cross-dock. And that means you're going to send to 1 to 3 facilities, depending on where you're shipping from and how much you're shipping. If you're doing oversized, you got to ship it around the entire country into one of 6 regions, and you can do, like we ship on oversized stuff for ourselves here at Pattern to over 100 oversized facilities. That is a massive difference. Also, the density on those is not the same, so you're going to be running LTL instead of doing full truckload. So the difference in cost is not a little bit more expensive. It's sometimes, in many cases, up to 100 times more expensive, depending on the size and the cube of the thing you're shipping. So I dive in that way to show the complexity of doing this is extremely important. And for a brand, that complexity sits on you. And I describe something. I get a lot of brands asking me. I actually sat with a brand yesterday, and they asked, there's a trend where brands are starting to say, hey, should I do this myself? And actually, frankly, like I'm not a Pattern employee right now. I'll take that hat off, and I'll put on just like I'm a human being. Here's what I'll tell you. You will pay a dumb tax of figuring this out, because it is extremely painful and very, very expensive. And your competitors around you, if you're a CPG sitting in the room, or a 50-year-old company or a 100-year-old company sitting in the room, your challenger brands have figured this out already. You're behind. If you're a challenger brand in the room, this is your competitive advantage, is the fact that they are going to be slow, right? That 50-year-old brand is going to be slow to figure this out. You don't have an option anymore. Like, this is one of the most complex things, and it's not just a side project. It just doesn't matter a little bit. It is the core between your profitability playing on a marketplace or not profitability on a marketplace. And this isn't just about how to move things around, but it actually has an impact on your 3PL or your own team being able to move things around the world. So if you, for example, have a 3PL that is moving product around, and you've got some standard size items, as Amazon defines them, and oversized items, both going in the same place, they have massively different requirements. Some might need to go small parcel, some has to go LTL. Like, you're gonna increase the complexity, you're gonna increase quality defects, and you're going to have to play with Amazon's rules. And also, you can't dictate this. Amazon wins 100% of the time. Like, we don't get to dictate to Amazon where we get to send things, right? You can, but it's really, really expensive, but only on standard size items. You can't even do it on oversized. There's some Amazon people in the room that I know, and I yell at them all the time about this. They're sitting in the back. How you guys doing? Our account managers are in the back. They're great. I'm just kidding. We work really well with them. You guys are awesome. But the reality is, like, Amazon, right? Like, everyone knows this. Amazon's the behemoth, and we do whatever they want every single time. It's like, this is not a small thing. And so how do you solve this as a brand? Like, this actually is part of the equation in trying to figure out if you should be 1P or 3P. When you talk to even somebody like a Pattern who's trying to figure out, like, can we make money together doing a thing? Or anybody else. You can answer anybody else that you're working on doing this. The same calculation matters. And that is, if your item is this much bigger, it matters a lot, right? So this is something you need that is not just your supply chain. It goes all the way back to the beginning of developing a product. The world is different than it was. It's not just shelf space at a Walmart. It is absolutely, from beginning to end, the complexity is quite a bit different. So this is just talking about the products themselves. Then you go beyond and you talk about all the different configurations that you have to deal with around return policies and shipping speeds and fulfillment options. So for example, you've got fulfilled by merchant, you've got seller fulfilled prime, which is this program that, like, not many people can get, or nobody gets into anymore. And, like, you know, if you have it, you basically have to, like, fend people off with a knife. Like, you know, it is a super tough program. It's very, very hard to manage, but you've got a bunch of different fulfillment options. Do you use FBA? Do you use FBM? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? If you're oversized, where does it make, like, you've got all of these. That's just Amazon. Then you've got Walmart WFS, which is obviously a very new program that they've changed the requirements on multiple times. Do you log into their UI? Do you use any type of automation? Do they even have any automation, right? Walmart is going to continue to grow, but they've shown the last 5 years that they have not put the investment in that other marketplaces have. And like you can see the results from that, right? But how do you play? That doesn't mean you can't and shouldn't play in that space. So how do you do that? If your supply chain team can't do that thing, then you can't play in that space. That's the reality of it, right? Because it's a totally different transaction than something like Amazon. And then you talk about your own D2C, which we'll kind of dive in a little bit deeper here in a second. But do you use multi-channel fulfillment? Like Amazon has obviously here, one of our sponsors and something that we talk about. It's great for some brands, but it's not good. It's just not a good fit for some other brands, depending on the size of your item, the control that you want to have. It's a great solution for many brands, but other brands having that solution where, I get many items in each order, for example, probably not the best cost solution with MCF. It's going to be better to be able to ship it in the same box, right? Because that's where Amazon wins, and that's where Amazon has won. But I do want to highlight that. Like Amazon won for many reasons, but two very big ones from a cost perspective. And it sounds very, very maybe complicated the way that Amazon did it, but they really did it in two different ways, right? One, they controlled their own destiny with supply chain. It was weird at the time. Like if you go back in time, it seems so evident and obvious today that like the Prime badge, like the Prime, right? Like you study Amazon and the growth that came from it. Prime is so important, but Prime doesn't exist without the supply chain advantages, right? They can't, if they don't have complete control over that, they can't do it. But from a cost perspective, where Amazon won is very simply, they put two things in the same box. They put two things in the same box, which sounds so stupidly easy. But it's actually, if you've been in warehousing in any way, it's one of the most complex problems to be able to solve, especially when you think about the fact that they have X number of warehouses. They can store Y number of units in each one of those warehouses, but they have 4 times the number of SKUs in their network than can fit in any one of those warehouses from that standpoint. You just can't solve that problem. So the fact that they have invested in putting two things in the same box has kept their cost structure so low, combined with the speed, Amazon wins. That's just like, that is the major thing that has helped them win. There were other marketplaces. There's lots of other marketplaces. Some of them even early on in the Amazon ecosystem, easier to purchase on. But the supply chain was the difference. The supply chain was the difference. And like that is where Amazon continues to shine and where other marketplaces have failed in trying to compete. Like that is the reality of it. And so when you think about it for yourself, there's two main things that are requirements as you are thinking about how do I hit the gas. I think every brand that I've talked to, every single brand, I talk to brands all the time, every brand I talk to is like, hey, how do I go international? How do I do X marketplace in the United States? Whatever that might be. And the reality is, if you don't have these two things in check, the answer is you're not going to be able to. Your inventory management strategy actually matters a ton. So for example, if you have 4 different 3PLs that are solving, and I guarantee there's people in the room that have this exact type of situation. My 3PL that does my traditional 100-year-old warehouse, right, company that has done logistics and they just move pallets and cases, but they can't move items. They do my Walmart and my Amazon 1P. But they couldn't do D2C, so I've got my other folks over here that do D2C. And my international one has this over here and blah, 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 and so forth. But if you're wrong, right, if you don't get, an inventory is fuel. It is fuel for your growth. And so if you put it in the wrong place and you're stranding inventory, if I'm saying I want 1,000 here and 1,000 here because I don't know, if you don't have a network that actually can do both of those things, you're going to strand yourself. You're going to absolutely choke out your growth. And Amazon, a marketplace, for example, that rewards in stock, that rewards sales. Amazon just wants to sell stuff. They're pretty agnostic to what that is, right? Like by definition, they're the most free marketplace that has existed in the history of time. They don't care about you as a human. They want to sell more things, right? So they're going to reward being in stock. If you are wrong for a week, your organic rank drops. And then you have to work to get that back, right? So like you have to be perfect in this growth period. And to do that, if you're spread out in 4 3PLs and you're in 16 different warehouses, you actually get in your own way. So your inventory management strategy is super key to how you think about interacting with these marketplaces. You have to be fast, you gotta be nimble, and you need to, as many times as you can, use inventory pooling in the same in the same bucket of inventory to have that flexible and fungible inventory. If you don't, you're going to end up getting behind. Here's the thing. You can forecast things. Do you know what? Every single forecast that has ever been created, the only thing they have in common is that every one of them is wrong. Every single forecast is wrong. So you're going to be wrong. It depends on how wrong you are and what the risk is. And so what a lot of brands do today is they do what? They just make a lot of stuff. So it means that your inventory balance has to be really high because you have to play insurance in each one of these marketplaces because your inventory is everywhere. So as you're navigating, how do I play in these marketplaces? How do we keep the fewest number of inputs for inventory possible? It's actually pretty critical. And as we think about D2C, we'll talk about here in a few minutes, it also matters in how you interact with your customers for speed and quality here within the United States as well. But this, even if you think about marketplaces, is important. And the second is very simply, can your internal team, your 3PL, whomever you were using, can they actually do that function? And so you got to be careful, right? Because people, if they can't do dropship, for example, if they can't send into Amazon 3P, you need to be really intentional. And what I will say is that wins over number one. And so I want to say, you should have both of these things, but if you have to choose, number two is more important. It is better to be in 4 3PLs, but make sure that you can do the thing that needs to be done for the marketplace, right? I hope that makes sense. That one is still the most important, but number one is you're gonna have higher cash balance. It's worse for your cash situation, and it's also worse for those marketplaces from a risk standpoint. So if you gotta choose number two, don't choose number one. All right, so let's focus a little bit on D2C. It's super interesting what has happened in the last few years. I mean, this is quite topical if you have been reading the news around Shopify logistics, right? So Shopify logistics, even last week, sold that entire entity, including the Deliver acquisition they had, 18 months ago, not even 18 months ago, over to Flexport. D2C is hard. D2C fulfillment is very hard. And I think people underestimate the value of doing this extremely well. And the complexity that comes with D2C shipping specifically is important. If you think about your D2C costs, I don't know how many negotiations I've done around, Pattern has Reach Logistics, which is, we are a 3PL. We do D2C shipping, that's one of our core pieces that we do as well, right? As we negotiate contracts, and I did this in previous life as well, everybody always talks about my pick-pack fees. They're always very nervous about, can I save 10 cents here and 15 cents there and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is 80% of your cost is in your shipping. It matters a lot more about your shipping cost than it does the pick-pack costs, right? That's generally true. And so 3PLs hide a lot of costs in your shipping because nobody knows how much it costs to ship something. Right? There's so much complexity around shipping a thing. So for example, I don't know how many people in the room would understand me saying this sentence. The difference between shipping an actual weight 3-pound box or a dimensional weight 8-pound box to zone 5. Most people are I don't even understand those words. But that actually is the thing that matters way more than saving 25 cents on your pick-pack costs. Your shipping costs matter a ton. Your shipping speeds matter a ton. And what I've got up here, your shipping options. So for example, I talked to somebody yesterday that said they use just FedEx and USPS. I actually think they're sitting in the room. Yeah, so we talked about this yesterday. We're why don't we use DHL? They're really slow. Maybe they are really slow. But also they have some shipping options that are really, really fast. So you've got and they've changed their entire offering. The shipping options matter a lot from what you are sending, what you're using to ship to a customer, right? Maybe DHL is the right solution for your brand. Maybe it's not. Maybe you should ship everything 2-day shipping. I don't know, right? But shipping options, meaning who are the carriers that you're using to get to that customer, the shipping speeds, what you're offering to customers at your checkout, and what actual customer preference, it's a collision of all of these things. And again, you can read the hot take. The thing about Prime that is brilliant is actually not that everything is 2 days. The power of Prime was telling you when the thing is going to arrive. That was actually the key. That's the power. Today, for example, Amazon pushes what they call push promise very frequently. Amazon pushes promise to 3 or 4 days, for example, but you still buy the thing because you know when it's going to arrive. That is far more powerful than knowing that it's going to be 2 days or 1 day, right? Now, those things obviously have advantages for conversion, right? Me personally, like if I see something that can deliver same day and I need it before tomorrow, that's great. That's good. Like I'm going to convert higher on that. Absolutely, right? But it's far more important on a D2C site. So a customer has already come to your site. They're all the way to the point of checkout. They've already given you a hug and said like, we love you and thank you. I'm not going to go somewhere else to buy this thing, right? At that point, you can only screw it up. But a lot of brands do screw it up at this point, right? Customers want options and they want to know when something's going to arrive. It is far more important than being extremely fast. It is the most important piece, is absolutely knowing when it arrives. This is another piece. You've got Amazon in 2017 to 2021. Now, like if you go back to 2010, for example, there were like, I don't even know, when I started, there were very few fulfillment centers comparatively here to 2021, when this growth really exploded through this period of time. You're not solving the same problem. And so some of the D2C fulfillment brands and companies that are out there doing fulfillment and 3PLs that are out there talk about, we're going to get you in 55 warehouses, right? We have 55 warehouses, or whatever. You're going to get in 13 different warehouses. The idea for the micro fulfillment and everything else. You are not solving the same problem that Amazon is. Amazon's solving a couple different problems, right? They're solving not only the speed to customer, but they're also solving, I need human beings to work in these like behemoth fulfillment centers in these warehouses, right? Like they're also solving that problem. They're also solving, I'm going to run out of real estate, like actual concrete. I'm going to run out of it. I'm going to, like this part of the world can't make enough, right? Like only slight hyperbole in some scenarios, right? Go to Indianapolis, Indiana, right? There's 1 billion different warehouses in that region, right? Go to the Northeast, and there's still not even enough for Amazon. They still are under there. But my point here is you don't need to be in 55 warehouses. In fact, it is not better for you. As your SKU count increases in D2C, the fewer warehouses actually works to your advantage. Same way if you get a lot of units in each order, advantage to you being in fewer warehouses. You shouldn't probably be in one, but you certainly don't need to be in 55. In some scenarios, one is exactly the right number that you need to be in, because once again, depending on the product that you have, that might be the right answer. If it's also really light, you're going to use USPS, there's literally no advantage for you not being in one warehouse, right? Because first-class mail, the difference between zone 6 and zone 8 is pretty minimal. It's 2 to 3 days no matter what for first-class mail or priority mail. And it doesn't matter. Like I can ship from Hebron, Kentucky to Hebron, Kentucky, and it's going to take 2 days. I can ship from Los Angeles to Hebron, Kentucky, and it's going to take 2 days. There's no real advantage to being in other warehouses if it's very, very light, and it's going to win through one of those services anyway. So, but in some scenarios, larger and heavier products, for example, you might need to be really close to customers because the difference between zone 4 and zone 5 might be $5, $10, depending on how large the item is. So the point is, everybody's different here, but you're solving a different problem than an Amazon or a Walmart or a Target is trying to solve. And the disadvantages of doing that from an inventory perspective is you absolutely, undoubtedly, mathematically have to have more inventory in all of your areas to cover all, like, it's just expensive insurance. You're paying very expensive insurance to be in lots of different areas. Also, if you have ever left a 3PL, who has left a 3PL? Lots and lots of hands. Has anyone left a 3PL where your stuff was in like 14 warehouses? It's the worst, right? Like getting stuff back and moving stuff around in that scenario, if you're making a transition, it locks you in the way that you don't necessarily want to be in. So there's no right answer here other than ensuring that you are in the right place for your brand, for your customer. Because if you circle all the way back to the beginning of what I said, you don't have a choice of where your customers are. You got to meet them precisely where they are. They're the one that's going to decide which grass they kill as they walk through to class, right? Like this is the same kind of concept. If your customers are on the West Coast, they're on the East Coast, it's just different for every single brand. And just be careful to get sucked, like you don't need to get sucked in. So for example, with one warehouse in the United States, so for us, we're in Hebron, Kentucky. In Hebron, Kentucky, we can ship ground shipping to 65% in 2 days in the United States. Hebron, Kentucky, 65% in 2 days. Got just short of like 25% in 1 day, because that's how it works. Like Hebron, Kentucky is a great place to ship from if you're going to have one facility. If you're in two facilities, let's say Hebron, Kentucky and Las Vegas, you actually are in like over 80% in 2 days. And you just caught LA, by the way, in 1 day. Now you're up to 35% in 2 warehouses. If you go ahead and throw one in New Jersey or Philadelphia or Baltimore or something on the East Coast, you're actually going to be like 95% of the United States population in 2 days, and 1 day you're going to be almost 50%. Just 3 warehouses. So again, you got to know the problem you're trying to solve. Don't try to solve the Amazon problem. Your customers don't need something on your Shopify site in 15 minutes. That is my bold claim. Some of them might want it. And maybe I'm wrong with some of your brands. Like, well, we sell a thing that this is correct. There are exceptions out there. Absolutely. This isn't a 100% solution. But for the vast majority, if you want to be profitable in D2C, there are multiple ways for you to do that, to engage with your customers. But the most important thing is offer shipping speeds, different options. Many times, if you have a standard, a fast, and a super fast shipping, right? Like you get a standard and expedited and the next day, what customers will do, they'll come in and they'll say, oh, I could pay $4 extra to get it in 1 to 3 business days, for example. They also say, I don't want to pay that. And they're a lot happier, right? So I've got a 4-year-old. And that 4-year-old, he's awesome. His name is Jackson. He's great. But early on, if I ask him, I don't know how many people in here have kids, but I ask him, I say, hey, do you want a snack? I'm going to give you, do you want a pouch? And he'll say no. But if I give him an option, if I say, do you want a pouch or a bar? He makes a choice. We actually, as humans, are no different than my 4-year-old Jackson. And if we have a choice, we're much happier. We're going to choose between the two things. If we're given a decision point, if we give a closed-ended, do you want the thing or not, we're less happy. It is human behavior. So it's important that you give options to your consumers is far more critical than even what those options are, and that they know when those things will deliver. It is far more critical than any other piece of that interaction with your customers. But if your 3PL can't ship 2-day or 3-day or 1 day, whatever that is, then that's going to be a problem, right? So as you think about interacting with your customers, it has an absolute change on abandoned carts, about conversion and everything else, absolutely connected in many ways to how you're showing on the screen to a customer what that looks like. So here's the way to think about this. I just talked for a very long time about all the complexities and all the bad news. I basically gave you no solutions. I just told you how bad the world is. And that's not great, maybe, but here's what I'll tell you. The complexity that is here is opportunity. It is absolutely the thing that is going to drive you forward. If you utilize, this is where it is a strategic weapon. Because your competitors, your teams, your customers, if you find the way to leverage and unlock new opportunities for growth, it is required for you to nail it in the logistics space. You got to do it. You got to fix the fulfillment pieces. And I said it earlier, if you're a CPG brand in here and you haven't figured this out, you are not going to be able to hire a couple people internally on your team and figure it out. It just won't work. So my advice to you as a brand is going to be, don't pay the dumb tax. If you want really, really fast, if you want a cheaper, more scalable, if you want a cheaper but less scalable and less fast solution, your internal team, there's too much concentration of knowledge. E-commerce logistics is not yet commoditized. I think that is the thing to really take away. Not everybody's the same. Not every 3PL is the same. Every single one has different capabilities, and it's just very, very different. The scale and the capabilities and the speed between 3PLs is still very, very broad. That won't be forever. Just like every other industry, you'll have homogenization, you'll have consolidation, you will eventually get to the point where it feels much more unique. And if you're not in this space, it's gonna feel from the outside like I'm paying the same and my pick-pack fee is the reason I'm gonna choose a partner. That is death. That is death for you. Don't pay the dumb tax. Don't focus far more on the capabilities than the pick-pack fees of your 3PL, of your partner, of your own internal teams. So be intentional about that. If Especially, this is something I've seen with many, many large old brands that have been around for a long time. They're like, oh, we figured it out before. How hard can it be? The answer is extremely hard and very, very complex. It's both complex and hard. It's a tough combination. But if you're a challenger brand, your advantage is your speed and your ability to meet those customers in a faster way in marketplaces that are far more accessible to brands without those established history of stuff ranging from marketing to the supply chain. So lean in. Like, don't fight that. And if you're a new, younger company, don't necessarily shy away from that complexity. It is your competitive advantage. So this is the key. It's not just a cost driver. Supply chain is no longer, well, it's sexier now, right? Like, we actually care about it more, which is super fun for me. Like, I'm very happy that this is true, right? Here's the thing. AI, Dave stood up there yesterday. We've talked about AI a lot. But the thing is, it's great job security for me because AI is going to change many things in this world. But the thing it can't change yet is moving stuff. Like, we still have to physically move things. So until we're 3D printing couches in your living room, I have a job. I don't know about you, but I have a job. And that was bold. I'm sorry that offended you. Don't get too scared. Like, not going to take over the world. It'll be fine. And then I'll start shipping 3D printers or something. I don't know, right? So, like, you got to nail this, right? The technology is important. AI is super important. The way that marketplaces are changing, all super critical. But at the end of the day, you got to move this stuff, and you got to move it well. That thing will stay for an extended period of time. So meet your customers where they are. Ensure that your team can do that thing, and don't pay the dumb tax. Find somebody that knows how to do the thing if you want to move fast, because it's harder than you think it is. It's more expensive than you think it is. And finding the right partner is not a small task. It is something that requires your entire and full attention. Last thing I'd say is if you got sales folks in the room, or you're someone who leads this and trying to make the decision and trying to convince your marketing and your sales teams, like, this doesn't look hard from the outside. Many of you in the room know this. It's like, well, you just got to move a thing, right? The massive simplification of the problem. So it's an important part for you to find out how you can articulate this in the right way to your sales team, to your marketing teams, to understand that a packaging change is actually massively important if your 3PL can't do custom packaging. These changes actually matter a lot, and it's on you to make sure that you're articulating this correctly. But the complexity is not something to be scared of. Lean in and find partners that can help you figure it out. Thank you very much.